that wound up inside their mouth has to go somewhere. And with the bloop sporting a row of slicing teeth lining its massive jaws, it might employ a method seen in other marine mammals: filter feeding. Alright, before we proceed, we'd like to play a little game with you guys. Here are two potentially hundreds of beachgoers or boaters from millions of gallons of sea gulp. The throat muscles and tongue contract and push forward. All of that water taken in with its victims is rapidly shot. The throat muscles and tongue contract and push forward. All of that water taken in with its victims is rapidly shot out from the mouth. In filter feeding whales, this means the water is run out across hair like baleen. But instead, our pool of poor victims would suffer the same fate of small fish and crustaceans swallowed by creatures like crab-eating seals. It's number one, either they are caught against the teeth and kept inside the mouth to be swallowed, or the sheer water pressure practically fires them through the gaps between the sharp teeth. That much pressure pushing into a victim with small gaps behind them could easily break their bodies apart and tear them limb from limb as they are violently ejected out. Body parts would be torn off, necks and spines would be snapped or shredded, and a bloody pulp might wind up floating off into the water. And those might have been the lucky ones. After all, at least they went out quickly. The rest go further down the hatch. Quick parenthesis here, you may have noticed we used a smaller, more juvenile version to show each bloop you wouldn't be able to see the people clearly. So using a small, juvenile bloop. Now, let's just assume that the physic-blooded mammal this size with this much insulating tissue would be heating up on the inside like a furnace. So, if we don't assume the temperature is pushed back down to normal levels for something like a bloop, the bloop might become hot enough to boil you alive on the way down. Congratulations! Those of you wearing a suit didn't end up as steaming soup. Now you get to go out in an even worse way because there isn't just one stomach. Why? So, despite their looks and carnivorous ancestors, whales are, and unfortunately in our scenario, some not-so-hard-shelled people. Entering the first chamber, the forestomach compartment, doesn't mean a direct dunking into the stomach acid yet. Keyword being yet. But abandon all hope, ye who enter here. Instead, this compartment is full of digestive microbes that help in breaking down certain keratinous structures. For our unfortunate bloop victims, this means nails, hair, and skin start breaking down, softening, and sloughing off after they are covered in vats of pre-digestive enzymes and microbes. Someone would have to survive asphyxiating to death from all the gases produced by these microbes, replacing a lot of the oxygen with toxic levels of carbon dioxide and methane. If they did by being lucky, or rather unlucky enough to be wearing something like a scuba tank to breathe from, they might have wished they went out the other way. The forestomach in some force. Despite their heap, the opening to the next chambers of the stomach are substantially smaller than the forechamber. So things smaller than the forechamber. So things need to get broken down before they continue on. For our unfortunate, the bloop has swallowed, intentional or otherwise, is kept inside the forechamber. And when the muscular walls start contracting and flexing, all of those inedibles are going to be sent crashing into them. There would be no time to get your bearings or try to escape. Within moments of arriving, you would find yourself with thousands of pounds of broken bones, squid beaks, rocks, and other swallowed objects falling on you like an avalanche, as parts of your body are sloughing off. In effect, some whales chew with this whale of a whale is no different. Ground and crushed into a pulp, the edible meat floats to the surface as what is left of you joins the grinding remains. Some of one victim's bones might wind up helping crush a future victim. The rest is shuffled into the main digestive stomach chambers to be further broken down and consumed. Anything that of the digestive journey. Even if a victim somehow survived the violent journey through the mouth, somehow had their own oxygen supply, and somehow was inside something sturdy enough to avoid being crushed to death, getting dunked into thousands of gallons of digestive acid would be curtains for anybody. Dead men tell no tales in the sea, and the victims of the bloop suffered probably one of the most horrific of all fates, depending on what step they perished in. Alternatively, the bloop might have the ability to produce its own kind of wax, similar to what sperm whales surprised if the victims of this giant cetacean end up in a perfume fortunate enough to meet our bioaccurate version in the open ocean while it has an appetite. Unlike the urban legend version popular on the web, Cryocidon setavenator is not a whale, but a hunter of whales. This gigantic beast doesn't look like a monstrous axolotl for no reason, as it is actually a type of marine amphibian from a bygone era, but a hunter of whales. This gigantic beast doesn't look like a monstrous axolotl for no reason, as it is actually a type of marine amphibian from a bygone era. So how might a not-so-fantastic voyage down the hatch of the sinister salamander play out? Time to find out. Just like the urban Poseidon does prefer to hunt whales for a far more substantial meal, it does filter feed smaller prey from time to time. With its enormous lifespan and lengthy periods of inactivity, any food will do. So, be it a young one trying to top itself off or an older one that can catch multiple victims at once, humans could wind up on the menu by accident or intention. This amphibian employs what is called suction feeding. This involves rapidly expanding the carnivorous mouth and shifting the internals down the throat to create a vacuum wave effect. The sudden change in water pressure violently draws prey along with a vast amount of seawater into the open cavity of the mouth. This much water moving back quickly so suddenly is going to create horrific pressure waves. Blood vessels in the eyes could burst and eardrums would almost certainly pop, potentially blinding and deafening victims even before they go down the hatch. Just like in whales, capturing more victims. Coated in viscous mucus, anybody still alive would be quickly immobilized and sent sliding down the throat. Amphibians typically, these serve a similar function to the forestomach agents in whales, weakening and corroding parts of the body to make them softer and easier to digest. Paralyzed, blind, probably deafened, and coated in enzymes, the next fate of cryosidon victims might just be one of the most horrific of all, depending on how active the amphibian is. Because cryosidon is an amphibian, not a mammal, it's capable of what is called mesothermy. Mammals, which are always animals, often localized parts of the body can be manually heated up to increase activity or speed up digestion. Great white sharks are one such example. So, if cryosidon was up and active, its internal stomach would be heated like a furnace. This is actually the least worst outcome for anyone who survives the trip to the stomach cavity. At least it means the stomach was producing plenty of acid to break down their body very quickly so that they can be digested. It would only take maybe a few minutes. But if the tadpole decided to take a nap, however, that's where it arguably gets even worse. When amphibians decide it. So, if the cryosidon had already eaten well and had plenty of nutrients already broken down further along in the digestive system, by the time a human hits the stomach, the victim may land in a nearly vacant chamber. The amount of stomach acid would be lessened, the air and other gases would be pumped out, surroundings grow cold, and they would just be left there. Paralyzed, half-digested, possibly blind, and left to nearly rot as the living tomb that had consumed them decides to rest and hibernate. You would not want to be the leftovers for the god of the frozen seas. At that point, you might arrive to challenge that whale-hunting god, both to keep either from consuming more and perhaps speed up the fate of any condemned to its cavernous void. From a titanic struggle. You've seen our bioaccurate takes on two of the most legendary urban bloop, or cryosidon sedivenitor, the great amphibian that can swallow up whole whales in the southern oceans. And the bioacking form is a horrific Now we pit both gods of the sea, studying their biology, weapons, and abilities to see who crowns themselves the sole apex of this vast realm. This is Cryosidon versus Colossihydrus on speculative marine monsters. If you have absolutely no idea what you're looking at, we'll quickly summarize our past coverage of these two combatants. Our bioaccurate version of the bloop took most of the core look, but modified it into something that would work better in reality. Designed and illustrated by our in-house research team, then brought to life by our animation crew, this new bloop still pushed nature to its absolute limits. This take, called Cryosidon sedivenitor, a whale hunter also named for the iconic Greek sea god, also responsible for earthquakes. It is the last surviving member of a multi-hundred-million-year-old amphibians that adapted to hunting progressively larger and larger whales in the southern oceans. And at 300 to 400 metric tons and over 35 meters long, this would be the largest predator to have ever existed. Its rival is a more modern creation, but also one that took the internet by storm. Inspired by the stories and image crafted for the bloop, creator Borisau Blois came up with the Grand Serpent and animated it in a series of videos that racked up tens of millions of views. It went from made real. Two titans that should never have met had the actions of mankind and a changing ocean not driven them together. What happens when the living earthquake confronts the symbol of a storm? We'll start comparing the first set of attributes in question. Section 1. Strength. Looking at the raw stats, a winner seems to be pretty clear. While they both exist in a range of sizes, the awesome amphibian Cryocidon seems to command a decisive lead when it comes to size, and thus strength. However, the gap between them is not insurmountable, and there have been numerous cases of oceanic predators killing body that is muscular from front to back, and is capable of using that body to wrap around, reposition, and if necessary, bash and bludgeon. Its rival, meanwhile, has a body very separated from front to back, the front end being that Goliath gape of a jaw and forward flippers, behind it devoted almost entirely to swimming and propulsion with a whale-like tail. This means if the two got into a close quarters brawl, the bioaccurate bloop would only be able to really use half its front body as effectively, whereas bioaccurate Grand Maha can utilize almost its entire body. Propulsion isn't useless at all. Combat maneuvers like tail strikes or helping propel the sturdy front forward for a ramming attack are all feasible. More mass also does mean if the Colossahydrus tries to wrap around or latch onto its opponent, it's going to need to get a good grip or it will be shaken off. The difference is not as immediately obvious, but numbers do speak for themselves, so the Cryo still manages to pull ahead in a surprisingly close category. Edge Cryocidon. Section 2. Gigantic sea beasts sport plenty of armor that almost any predator would struggle to get through. Except its hide is its main means of insulation against cold water, being almost half a meter thick in several areas and highly resistant to punctures or stabs from anything but supersized attackers. Important for shrugging off bites from others of its own kind, fending off orcapods as they're growing up, and resisting pestering, nibbling, or gnawing from any overly aggressive or parasite. God is resting on the seafloor for weeks at a time between big meals. The Colossahydrus also isn't the only defense being evaluated here. While the colossal sea dragon has less padding covering up its vitals, its skin has a hidden defense, also seen in fellow jaw. Means that if the Cryocidon attempts to engulf and swallow its opponent entirely or partially whole, its insides could possibly get clogged up by this chemical defense, and the glue-like mucus might severely hinder its jaws if it got too much of it stuck to its teeth. With this chemical defense augmenting a still fairly resilient body, bioaccurate El Gran Maha takes the edge in defense. Grand Maha takes the edge in defense. Section 3. Back and huge head to keep stable, Cryocidon easily fits into that category too. This means this awesome amphibian would be able to use its front end like the bow of a ship to break the waters ahead of it, before pushing through with strong motions of its tail, conserving energy and momentum to lunge at surprising speed. Its rival, Colossahydrus, hell body. This has its own advantages and adaptations to factor. For one, instead of just propelling itself with the latter half of its body and tail, this species of jawless fish engine moves air and can help this literal sister underwater. Since gravity isn't pulling things down to the same degree, since most animals are roughly as dense as the water around them, having more mass, fin whale are actually some of the fastest once they get their momentum going. And with a decisive weight advantage, the frozen sea god has a lot more inertia keeping that top speed going than the colossal sea dragon, giving the realistic bloop an advantage in both top speed and this category. Those who have cephalopods use, as with all things in biology, Poseidon having a body form closer to the thuniform swimming means it can push against the water harder, forward and backward, and can achieve a higher top speed than its rival. But this also means almost all of its swimming muscles are located on its back half, with only the flippers up front to push against the water and redirect its momentum. Those huge flippers certainly do plenty to help with steering, but as an ambush predator, Cryocidon prefers to commit to a charge and engulfing bite instead of pursuit and close quarters maneuvering, as covered in its in one direction. With these adaptations and a more flexible body to whirl around, the bioaccurate Grand Maha takes another edge in this oceanic clash of titans. The two first. How will this play out? How will this affect the battle? To find out, we need to take into account senses. In terms of, it's a matter of quantity versus quality. Cryocidon evolved from amphibians that at one point lived at the surface or even crawled on land. This means its eyes had to adapt to much more ocean would. It's one of the main reasons that marine mammals like dolphins have better eyesight than sharks, which infamously have a hard time seeing up close, the reason you hear about. In addition to sight, this atrocious-looking axolotl cousin does have a decent sense of smell and taste to pick up chemical traces in the water. Since it also hunts whales, it would have the ability to hear, which is fairly rare for ocean predators since most fish are deaf. However, these senses would mostly just be used for figuring out the region a target is, rather than specifically pinning it down. For that, it has to rely on sight. Its rival approach or varied toolset of the colossal conodon takes a keen edge. Now to bloody section 7, bite effectiveness. Both of these entities are so mind-bogglingly huge that trying to get specific bite forces would be almost pointless. Either of the two have more than enough force with teeth more than sharp enough that no amount of armor is going to completely negate their fangs taking their pounds of flesh and then some. Instead of looking at specific forces, which would highly vary anyways because of any number of factors like water resistance or how much the teeth are making contact, we'll be looking at what the bites of either would be capable of doing to each other. Colossohydra's simpler and straightforward bite, but no less deadly. The bioaccurate bloop is essentially a stupendous salamander descended from a lineage of amphibians called trematosaurs. These seagoing amphibians have all the major hallmarks some of their more land-based relatives still have, and some tricks of their own. With a sturdy and robust jaw that can open over 7 meters, Cryocidon's species name of Sedivenator, or whale hunter, is there for a reason. This cavernous maw is built to open wide and engulf, lined with dozens of smaller teeth about 0.15 meters or 6 inches long, and it has 2 massive lower tusks extending out almost 2 whole meters each. These fangs are so big it requires holes in the top jaw to accommodate and slot them in, and are built to harpoon into prey. It also means if it snaps down on something thin enough to fit the entire fang through it, they are completely trapped. But the grisly grill doesn't end there. Lining the roof of the mouth are batteries of even more fangs called pterygoid and palate teeth. Just like some other ancient amphibians like cacops, this means even if something gets past the initial row of teeth on the jaw, such as an entity being swallowed whole, they will get sliced, stabbed, and shredded before they go down the chute. Both of these magnificent monsters have impressive weapons that could certainly do a number on each other. One of the differences to better decide this category comes down to how that damage is inflicted. Colossohydrus has to bite and about some serious piercing power, perhaps even capable of reaching vital organs. And anything inside its mouth would probably be met with even more teeth, grasping both prey and the edge in bite effectiveness. The culmination of this collision course is nigh, but before they engage in bloody combat, the X Factor. While the ocean might not be big enough counter that's about to unfold is first contact between both juggernaut individuals that represent some of the absolute pinnacles of their respective species. This means neither of the two know by instinct or experience what the other is capable of, nor had any ability to naturally evolve defenses against them. Cryocidon, meanwhile, would have been much more accustomed to other gigantic animals, being in the same ocean and instinctively knowing more about how to react to them. After all, the whales in the southern oceans nearest the South Pole are the biggest that have ever lived, and a variety of species can be found near the icy waters. Species that are otherwise quite rare in more equatorial habits the ferocious fish comes from. On one end, other, we have a massive amphibian who got this big by eating and fighting big. We are now ready, and Sedivenator with its colossal form wins the edge in strength, speed, and bite effectiveness. The slithering titan wins the edge in defense, senses, and agility. For the scenario, and in tribute to the infamous animation pitting the fantastic versions of these creatures against each other by Boris Alvlois, confrontation will be caused by diminished food stocks, motivating a massive Colossohydrus pursuing migrating whales further south than it otherwise would, and heading for the southern Caribbean. At the same time, overfish are migrating from the south, as well as attacking fishing boats en route as it heads up the South American coast. A collision of the two most gigantic predators to ever exist for the very first time starts now.
Para mí,
In a colossal clash that would capsize ships caught in the crossfire, it was the whale eater Cryosidon who just barely pulled a victory, a colossal serpent. But this one was close, especially given that the loser survived the battle with relatively decent health. When it comes down to raw stats, the two are basically at an even trade. Where one succeeded, the other wasn't far behind and got a victory in a different category. But neither totally outclassed the other, and many of their advantages were relatively situational. For instance, if the battle happened exclusively at night and in very dark water from the deep, the ferocious fish would have had a distinct advantage because its eyesight is better at picking up targets in low light, and its other senses better help it detect dark red color scheme and would be more nullified, while it is totally unaware its opponent has a much clearer view of it and would see it coming. The mucus defense of the fish certainly would help stop up the jaws and surprise the amphibian, but the sheer volume of the bloop's maw, the ability for it to close off its throat to avoid choking on the slime, and the huge size of its fangs means that the slime couldn't stop all of the teeth. More importantly, the cryo, having its gills outside of its maw, meant that the same strategy that would potentially choke out a shark by clogging up its gills from the inside wouldn't work. The major deciding factor was who could hurt who the most, even if landing that death blow might have been extremely difficult for both of them. Had this bloop been derived from a giant shark or whale, does less blood pressure, less blood flow. Less blood flow, less bleeding out, keeping the bloop in the fight just a little bit longer, and allowing it to keep up its strength even after injury. The sharp teeth of El Gran Maha absolutely were capable of inflicting massive wounds on its opponent, but the weight difference and speed difference meant it couldn't capitalize off of that to the best degree. The cryo would either shake it off and speed away, or come at it in a charge over and over again until it managed to get a good hold, while minimizing the time the fish had to retaliate with its better agility. A scenario if the Colossahydrus won, which absolutely could happen, would be death by 1,000 cuts. And in just slightly more than 50% of the scenarios, it didn't get to inflict that many. It might actually be the case that times the fish was victorious were instances the fight ended in a death, whereas the amphibian would win slightly more confrontations, but less lethally at times. After the whale eater's victory, Cryo and Colosso would likely forever avoid each other, perhaps focusing on different game. And with whale population